Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm actually pretty nervous about filming this because quite a lot of you guys are new. I made a video for the StudyTube project and I think a few of you guys have come over from that. So if you have, hi, welcome, thank you for subscribing. Today we're going to talk about what is potentially the most difficult bit of essay writing, and that is analysing articles and forming arguments. So I figured what we could do is go through a real journal article, talk about how I would make notes on that and then how I would form arguments from that. And then afterwards I'll show you some notes that I wrote for an essay that I did quite well on, so it got 85 in the end. So hopefully that could be kind of useful, showing you the notes and the plan from that. Now I know that essay writing can be a little bit of a dry subject, so I've tried to pick an interesting article. We're going to be talking about manslaughter. It goes into a real criminal case, so hopefully that should be interesting. Now criminal isn't sort of my speciality, it's not what I'm really good at, so if I make mistakes please point them out. And also if you've got any good ideas about forming arguments, analysing articles, please leave them in the comments. I really like hearing from you guys. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, I'm going to give you a really quick rundown of the system that I use to take notes, and then we're going to get into actually reading this article so we can read it together, pick out the key points, pick out the key arguments and sort of go from there. So I make all of my article notes in a uniform way. I've got a template that I fill in. And the reason that I do that is it helps me to go back to the notes later. Helps me understand the article. It also keeps me on track, so it keeps me concentrating, knowing that I have to fill out these details, and it can help to flag things that are important at the beginning. So I always write the author's surname and the article name just so I can find it later. The date, which is quite useful because sometimes an article will have been written before a certain law has been passed or right after a key case, so the date can be sort of relevant in what the author is arguing. Then the journal, which can be relevant again because different journals will appeal to different audiences, they'll have different target markets, and they might be contributed to by different people. So for example, the British Medical Journal, there might be a lot of doctors writing. So the sort of bias behind the source can sort of be spotted by looking at the journal. I won't necessarily always fill out all of these things, sometimes they're not as relevant. So the next one is the premise, and I mainly use this if there's sort of a theme behind an article. So if it's a response to somebody else's article, if it's part of a bigger debate, if it's part of a big study that was going on, I want to note that down. Then I've got a bit for the central argument, which I generally won't fill in until the end, and that's just sort of a little summary to remind myself of what the author was actually saying, because I don't want to pick out a little point and for that sub-argument that I've picked out to actually not be what the author was saying overall. And then I've got sub-arguments, which is where most of my notes will end up going, down here, and that'll be useful for putting into my plan later. So the general idea with this method is that I start with my key reading and read a few key articles and sort of come to my own argument, figure out what I think about something by reading those articles. I then start to make a plan and then fill in the weaknesses in that argument and the holes in my reading by doing more nuanced specific reading. So let's get started. So the first thing that I'll do when I pick up an article is I will skim the abstract and read the conclusion just to make sure that it's relevant for what I need it for and that I'm not wasting my time by looking at it. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to say that we're looking into when should it be a... So we're looking into criminal liability by omission. Sometimes you can commit criminal acts by failing to do something. For example, if you're watching somebody drown and you don't step in to help them, sometimes that can be criminal, but not always. And I'm going to say that the question we've been set is when should it be criminal to fail to help in that kind of way? And that's what this article is about. Okay, so I've read the abstract and I've figured out that she's arguing that we're moving towards a Good Samaritan law, so it being the case that it would always be criminal to fail to help somebody that's in danger. Let's just have a look at her conclusions really quickly. Okay, so she talks about transparency and clarity and how at the moment it's not against the law to fail to help, but in practice we're moving towards that, and if that is the case then people need to know. So that looks relevant for our question. So the next thing that I'll do is actually fill in the majority of these details. So what I'm noticing immediately is that it's quite recent, so it's probably up to date on the law, and it's also in quite a, well, very reputable journal. Now the premise, she talks a lot up here about examining a case that hasn't been reported anywhere. So I think it's a case from, it's a case from the Crown Court, and it wasn't reported, there's not been any commentary on it, and she's looking at it to try to analyse the law. Okay, and we've figured out that a central argument is that we're moving towards it always being criminal to fail to help. Okay, and now that I've filled that in, I'll move on to doing my sub-arguments. So the first thing that I'll try to do is sometimes at the beginning of an article, an author will break down what it is that they're doing, especially in a longer article. They'll say my first section is this, my second section is this, and if they do that, then I'll break this down, so maybe like section 1, I don't know, whatever it is, section 2. Okay, but I don't think she actually does that here, because it's not a very long article. Okay, so the first thing that she does is she outlines the facts of this unreported case that she's going to be looking into. So it'd probably be useful to have a note of this in here. So the facts of this case are a man was out drinking and taking drugs. I think he's drunk alcohol, he's taken cocaine and cannabis, and he makes the evidently very sensible decision to go down to the harbour with a 17-year-old girl. So he's 21, she's 17, they go down to the harbour together. They're both drunk, and he says they're mucking around, and somehow this 17-year-old girl ends up in the sea. And she can't swim, she's drowning, she calls out for help, but the defendant doesn't help her, refuses to help her. And then immediately afterwards he goes back to the nightclub and continues dancing. It takes 2 hours for him to call the police. Sadly the victim dies, and the defendant is tried firstly for murder on the basis that he pushes the victim into the sea, but obviously that's very difficult to prove because there was nobody else there. Secondly, for unlawful act manslaughter, so again saying that he pushed her into the sea and that would be unlawful, but that he lacked the intent to kill her. And finally he's tried for gross negligence manslaughter by omission, which means that he owed her a duty of care and then failed to help her out of the sea. So that's the criminal offence by omission that we're looking at. Okay, so he pleads guilty to gross negligence manslaughter because it's the lowest of those 3 charges, so presumably he thinks that it's a fair sort of plea to enter. Completely forgotten, but what I should be doing the entire time here is writing down page numbers as I go through, because if I end up moving any of this into my plan later on, I need to know where it comes from in the article so that in my footnotes I can reference exactly where it came from. Now I find it useful to colour code my notes. The way that I'll do this is I'll use sort of a lighter colour for less relevant stuff, or like just to note where the key sections are. I'll use a darker colour for like really relevant stuff, and then I have a different colour for sort of my own thoughts, and this I think is the really key bit. If I was to see this and then say, I don't know, seems like a lenient sentence or something, I don't know if it is, then I'll put that in a different colour, and then I'll know that it's my own original thought, and that really helps with forming the arguments later, because I can look back at these notes and I can go, oh, that's what I thought of that, and that's what I thought of that, and I can start sort of forming an overall argument in my head. So if something keeps coming up, like, oh, we're definitely moving towards a Good Samaritan law, or it should never be a criminal offence to fail to help somebody, if that's what I keep thinking, then that should probably be my overall argument. I don't think I explained this very well. You can definitely also argue things that you don't necessarily agree with. What you're looking for is strengths and weaknesses in the arguments, or similarities with other sources, or things that conflict with each other. Okay, so she starts outlining the legal principles, and she says, for gross negligence manslaughter by omission, you need this duty of care. So I quite often like putting quotes directly into my notes, and this is just because I like having the quotes in my plan. It helps me to read the quote sort of in the author's own words to then critique it, so that I don't sort of gradually distort what they were saying, and so that I can critique their exact language. So I quite like this bit. So they're saying, the only duty of care that the defendant here had was due to the neighbour principle. So there wasn't any sort of relationship between them. The lady that was drowning wasn't his daughter or anything like that. He just had a duty to help her because not helping her might cause harm. And that agrees with what I was saying up there about this seems like quite a wide duty. It seems like people are really being criminalised quite often for failing to help. So she wraps up this point by saying, here are the established categories under which somebody has a duty to help somebody else. So if there's a statutory duty, so if for example there's a statute that says all firemen must try to prevent harm, then you might have a statutory duty. Public duties, So I suppose this would be things to do with the state. Contractual duty, a duty arising from a special relationship, so this is the parent and child thing that we've been talking about. A voluntarily assumed duty, so if you say to somebody else, I'm not going to let you drown. And a duty arising from creating or possibly contributing to the creation of a dangerous situation. Yeah, so these cases are often to do with taking drugs. If you create a dangerous situation, then generally you have a duty to prevent harm arising. So like if you supply somebody with drugs, sometimes you get a duty from that. But what she's saying is the case that we're looking at, so where they go down to the docks together, they don't really know each other, she falls in the sea and he fails to help, they don't fall under any of those categories. So he doesn't have a contractual duty to help, he hasn't voluntarily assumed the duty, there isn't a special relationship, for example. So it seems like the law's sort of being expanded there. But this is just in the Crown Court, so like, is it not being applied properly in practice? Okay, and the article goes on, but I'm sure you've got the idea now, and I think I've probably done the most interesting bit, so I'll move on to the next section. So what I do next varies essay to essay, but generally I'll summarise what I've just read, or any really important arguments that I've thought of, on a sheet of paper, and start sort of drawing connections between all the different things that I've read, writing down ideas for arguments that I could form, until eventually I can start filling in a plan that looks something like this. So all of these arguments that I've been writing in a different colour all through my notes, I'll go back through all of those notes, I'll draw out those arguments and I'll start to categorise them, and they'll form different points, and I'll put those into different paragraphs, start sort of playing around with things, and the next thing that I'll do is I'll copy and paste the notes that I've made into that plan, I'll copy the whole quote in. I like making like really long plans with all of my thoughts kind of in it. Now this is a completed plan, it won't look anything like this when I'm sort of just forming my arguments. There'll be lots of holes, I'll put in red text that's like research this point more, I'll put in ideas for things that I could read, and eventually my reading log will look something like this. So I did a lot of reading for legal skills, but you can see I've got loads and loads of these uniform case notes, and they're all sort of broken down, they've got lots and lots of colour in them. Immediately I can see, oh, this is what I thought about this argument. I've got page pointers in all of it so I can see exactly where things came from. And if I wanted to then put this into a plan, I'd just copy an individual point and move it over into the plan. So I end up just reading until my plan looks completely full. I guess I'll just show you an entire sort of completed one. So I've got like the author, the article name, the date, the journal, and then all of my little sub-arguments with the important bits highlighted, my own thoughts in a different colour. And that's honestly about it. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found this useful. I'm trying to make 2 videos a week at the moment because I finished my exams, so I think I should be able to manage that. The next 2 that I've got planned I'm particularly excited for. I'm excited for you guys to see them. But anyway, I will see you guys again really soon. Thanks for watching. Bye!